Welcome to the U.S. Manufacturing Today podcast, your hub of information about the U.S. manufacturing and distribution industry. Brought to you by Variable, the on-demand labor solution revitalizing and optimizing your operation, enabling just-in-time response to demand, more efficient production, and lower cost per unit. And now your host and head of reindustrialization at Variable, Matt Harine.
Welcome back to U.S. Manufacturing Today, sponsored by Variable, where we talk with the leaders, innovators, and changemakers shaping the future of American industry, along with providing regular updates on the state of the industry, the changing landscape, policy, and more. Today, we're joined by someone who brings a unique 360-degree view of manufacturing in the U.S. He's an author, a business strategy advisor, and a prolific content creator for the industrial world. Jim Vinoski has studied hundreds of companies through his work at Forbes and his own Substack columns. He's seen what works and what doesn't across a wide swath of U.S. industry. Most importantly, his work tells the story of so many companies, industries, and organizations that make up the backbone of the U.S. economy and manufacturing. He is also the host of Manufacturing Web Show and Talks via YouTube and Rumble, where I had the opportunity to join him for his show, and now he is welcome on ours. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be here.
We're glad to have you, and I think we'll just jump right into it. One of the big things that we've talked about, I know, on your show and what I've seen in a lot of your content is this macro view of manufacturing right now. What we're experiencing is some call a renaissance, some call reindustrialization. But you've had a front row seat to the highs and lows across the industry for many years and generated a lot of content on it. What's your take on where American manufacturing stands today and where it's headed?
Yeah, I like to say we're having a manufacturing moment right now. It's just like all the stars are aligned all of a sudden. And we've talked about a lot of things for a number of years that are finally coming together, coming to fruition. But it's still a place where we've got to play our cards right to really maximize the effect and make it a lasting thing beyond the moment. And I think that's where we need to focus.
Absolutely. And you see a lot of the change happening in real time where we say we provide an update and by the time we record and go to publish, the environment can change pretty dramatically. What are some of the most dynamic things that you're seeing right now and some of those trends where you say, hey, over the past few years, we've talked a lot about it, but now we're seeing it in action?
Reshoring is a big one. A number of people have been talking about that and doing a lot of great advocacy. Harry Moser at the Reshoring Initiative, for example. I know you just did a show as well with the Reshoring Institute. And those folks should be rightly proud of what they've delivered because it's happening as we speak right now. And so a lot of policy things and industry activities that they were proponents for have taken place and driven us the right direction. There's still a lot that needs to happen, though. What I was really pushing last year was the challenge we have with electricity, with power generation. And I was saying we're in an existential risk moment here as we headed into the election, that if that had gone the other way, we'd be looking at a future like the UK and Germany are, deindustrialization, because energy was going to get much more expensive and much less reliable. We've dodged the bullet nationally, but there's still half the states that are chasing that same direction, and we've got to fix that in as many places as we can. But I think all in all, things are looking much more positive to me than they have in a number of years. And I've never seen, and I've had a multi-decade career, I've never seen a time like this where we've just got so many proponents and people in general realizing that, yeah, what we did was not the smartest thing in the world, and we need to go back to making stuff for ourselves and being a little more self-sufficient.
That's a big component of a lot of the conversations that we have, and what is going on is not only is manufacturing vital economically, it's a national security issue on multiple levels. And one of those is being able to produce your own energy, which we're seeing a great regulatory reform on that front. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that because I've talked to multiple businesses who have told me that power is actually an issue at the even local level. Spoke with a business owner who moved facilities, and he said his number one problem was getting his machines up and running because they didn't have the right type of power facilitated to the building. So it's interesting to see that from the macro scale all the way down to I moved facilities and now I have an issue. So a really great one to highlight. Let's take a quick pivot to your lessons from the 300 plus companies that you've profiled. You've done that in Forbes, you do it in Substack. I know you profiled Variable before. I've had the honor of you profiling another company that I previously worked at, Victaulic, and I remember reading it and thinking, I'm at two companies where Jim Vinoski has profiled our company, and I've really made it. But I love reading the stories, and what you love to do is tell that story. And you've had a front row seat to the highs and lows across the industry. What's your take on where those companies stand today and where it's headed?
A lot of that goes back to my start with Forbes 7 years ago. When that opportunity came my way, I was talking to the woman who became my first editor as that initial interview, and she wanted to know what I wanted to write about. And I said, the main thing I want to write about is what Americans make, because there's so many people out there who think we just don't make anything anymore. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Yeah, we've had a lot of stuff that's gone overseas. We've had whole swaths of industry that have been hollowed out almost to the point of non-existence. Textiles in the U.S. is now, we make 3% of what we wear. Shipbuilding, we're 0.1% of global shipbuilding output. Just absolute insanity for, like you said, national security in that regard. But that being said, we're still number 2 worldwide as a manufacturing nation, an industrial nation. And I think we ought to regain number 1. The beauty of having that opportunity now with Forbes to dive into those hundreds of companies is to see every single one of them has been through the ups and downs, and pretty much all of them have been on the ropes, pretty close to shutting down at some time or other, and they've made it. They were able to survive where other companies weren't. And so being able to talk to the people who've fought those battles and understand how they made it, it's a lot of different things for the different kinds of businesses they are, but just having that resilience and that never say die attitude to do what it takes to survive and get to where that next upswing comes so your business recovers. That's, to me, really the number 1 message.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the overwhelming sense is that you get a profound level of optimism from people who make and build things. Like you said, they're on the ropes, and that fighting spirit in manufacturing is something that always seems to persist. And people look at it at the daily and weekly and annual level of coming back and doing what they do best. And I think one of the things that you mentioned there was so interesting when you dive into specific segments of industry like textiles or shipbuilding. A lot of the discourse we see in media today says there are some things that we don't want back, or there are some things that are better left in a sweatshop somewhere, or there are things that are maybe we don't want to do that in just advanced manufacturing. My experience has been a little different, and I imagine yours is as well, where anything that we make as a producing country and as people who make and build things, it's all on the table. And I'm curious about your take on that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I had a comment on one of my Substack articles. This guy who was neck deep in the economic theory thing, and I'm a big fan of economics, and right there with the ideas, if you're parroting the quotes of the Austrian economists to people who've lost their jobs to unfair overseas competition, you're not gaining ground. And this guy would not let go of it. And he said that exact thing. He said, I've been in a garment factory, and that's just not a job I think we should have here. Talk about the arrogance of, I find this work distasteful, so no one in my country should be able to even access it, to be able to have that job. It's just insanity. And it's really been a driver of what we've seen, is that the urban people who get away from how we grow things, how we mine things, how we make things, are the ones who pass these crazy layers of regulation that then force people not to be able to make it here and move it overseas. And meanwhile, our fellow citizens have their jobs disappear, have their communities crater. You have knock-on effects like the drug and alcohol problems and civil unrest and violence. All of that stuff can be traced back to not having that future. And the fact is, in America, I'm not going to say never, because you can hide some things that are probably pretty distasteful. But again, I've got a multi-decade career. I've never worked in a sweatshop. It's all been in manufacturing. For the most part, it doesn't exist, because to be able to compete in the U.S., you have to be more highly automated. You have to be less loaded up with manual labor, because our labor costs are so much higher by virtue of being a richer country. And so that's what we as a nation have as a strength, is being able to produce without larding it up on this physical back-breaking labor. We've gotten away from that, and that's one of the big advantages we have today, and one of the ways we're leading the world in the right direction in manufacturing. So I don't think any segment of industry should be off limits. That, to me, is just utter nonsense.
No, absolutely spot on with where my thinking was. And it's so interesting that you mention that cosmopolitan worldview that kind of steps away from, where do the things that I use on a daily basis come from? That goes beyond manufacturing. Where does my food come from? Where does the clothes that I'm wearing today come from? it really is a level of societal preservation when you take a step back and think about without the electricity or without the means to make and build for ourselves, produce our own medicine, produce our own food, you're about 48 hours away from a societal collapse in that event if something were to happen. And I've always heard that estimate and thought that's crazy, but you've seen how it plays out when there's national emergencies and things begin to teeter a little bit and not being able to actually answer the call to a true national emergency because we don't have the shipbuilding capacity or we're unable to produce. If you look back, and this is always a funny anecdote because I don't know how real it was, but the ventilator production during the pandemic era where we certainly didn't need as many ventilators, but you saw manufacturers pivot and stand up and say we could do it if we needed to. And that certainly played out as a great story. I think one of the other things that comes to mind, and especially through your work and your deep dive into hundreds of companies, what patterns have emerged around success or failure in those companies? And where do you see the greatest success stories, just not only the Made in America approach, but how they go about and do this type of work? Is it the optimism, or what is the key driver that you see that makes these manufacturers successful?
Yeah, that's multi-pronged. Number one is absolutely that optimism and that can-do spirit. I always say manufacturing is the crucible of the business world because you can't hide. You have to make what you intend to make. You have to make it at a quality that is going to sell at a price that's going to make you profitable. And if you're not doing those things, you disappear. And so many of the companies that I have dug into and that are my favorite stories are ones that have lasted years and decades and generations. I've got companies, and I'm working on a book to sing the praises of the unsung heroes of American manufacturing. I'm shooting to get that out here at the end of the summer this year, featuring 21 companies, and most of them are multi-generation companies. The longest tenured one, 6th generation family leadership right now. And so it's that consistency of optimism and ability to deliver the goods despite the challenges. The other thing I see again and again are the lasting companies and the ones that have not just the leaders who fight that battle, but everyone aligned in that battle. And that's what you have to survive the really tough times. They're the ones who, not going to say they treat their people like family. Family is a special thing. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's one remove from that. It's treating people like where you are personally involved in every single person that's in the organization. And it's not like the CEO is going to be going to dinner with every single team member out there on the floor, but it's that structuring the organization so that every single person is taken care of on that personal level. And I think my kind of golden example for that is a company called the Monti Group that's up north in Michigan, northern Michigan in the Lower Peninsula, in resort central. You wouldn't think there's manufacturing at all in this place. It's beautiful beaches and just a gorgeous area. But it's this family that started manufacturing. They're on their 5th generation. It's truly a multinational conglomerate of a number of different businesses, and they've branched out even into real estate and things like that. The things they do for their people are just exemplary. I was up there in January learning about how they're taking a motel they owned and turning it into what they call the 3-quarter house, so that the people they hire out of halfway houses who are in recovery have a place to go when they can't stay in the halfway house anymore. They need to move on. They're not out on the streets. They're not renting someplace where they're back with the bad crowd. They're in a supportive environment. And then on the other end of it, one business they're in is sand and gravel. They had a played out sand and gravel pit. What do they do with it? They build a low-cost housing development for people because it's a resort community who can't afford to live in the normal houses. So they use the latest in modular construction and structured it where it's very affordable for people to get into these houses and start living their lives. It's just, that to me is what sets these companies apart, is that optimism coupled with that true tie to the people who do the job every day.
That's such a great story about how manufacturing orders of effects in small communities or in even mid-size or large urban centers where manufacturing really impacts the quality of life around everyone, and especially where it plays out in how they spend their dollars, how they spend their earnings. But when a company can really focus in on how do they provide for the community and custom make it for their workforce, that's a really inspiring story from that company up in Michigan. We've taken a look at the big kind of strategic change in the overall story on reshoring and what companies are doing today, and maybe we'll zero in on a little bit more of the tactical side. Tariffs is anybody's guess. I don't think anybody who tells you they know exactly what's going to happen with tariffs knows what they're talking about, because this is our first run at what we would consider a trade war, because it is, and it's our first run at tariffs of this magnitude in at least a century. And so it seems to be playing out on a daily, weekly basis. What are some of the tactical fixes, and you could probably provide some insight on that you would give manufacturers for quick wins in this type of environment?
The smart ones learned from COVID and made adjustments before this hit. And I think that's the lesson to be learned, is if you didn't catch on from the supply chain disruptions we had coming out of the pandemic, don't miss this moment. You better be out there beating the bushes for where can I get things when my existing supply source breaks down. And I know it's oftentimes tough to pivot real quickly, but as you work through the challenges day to day of what the disruptions are causing, you have to prioritize also doing that hard work of how do we make sure this doesn't happen again.
That's something we're seeing play out in real time. I've met with many manufacturers who, I don't want to say hedged, but bet that there was something that was going to change one way or the other. And this long end to what we would consider the world order or globalization, where everything's outsourcing or moving to shifting to different types of countries. And it comes back to reshore, and that real-time transition back to reshoring. The ones who built that into their strategy seem to have a leg up, and they're not scrambling as much, but they certainly have been at the front of the line in terms of taking on new orders and maybe expanding their business. I think that's part of the transformation story, and we've talked a lot about it through my work at Variable and your interest in Variable as a company. A lot of the challenges that we hear, or some of the catchphrases that are used, are there aren't enough workers, or there's a worker shortage. And our position on that is about labor access and people being able to find real-time work and match it with companies' real-time demand. But from what you've seen, and I have seen a couple of articles and your thoughts on this, but curious for the audience, what's the real story when it comes to tech adoption and workforce development and that type of operational transformation in U.S. plants on the ground level? What does that look like to you?
Let me echo your thought there. Really is not so much a worker shortage as a skills gap, and something we certainly should have seen coming, but here it is. And no matter how well you foresaw it, you're feeling it. It goes back to that automation piece we talked about earlier. It's one of the ways that we adjust here in the US and in the Western world is by looking to technology to help us with these kinds of problems. And I look at you guys and some other companies I've covered that are bringing solutions to the floor to help people accomplish their work. You think about the old ERPs, and it's so much beyond that. It's on the floor systems that will literally know the operator or the maintenance person because of AI. They'll have learned that person's way of doing things and will offer real-time, here's the next step if you're stuck. Real-time work guidance, whether it's clearing a jam or fixing a machine. Having that kind of backup when you've got less skilled operators and maintenance techs it's a game changer. And similarly, we look at things like lean. I think when people have gotten very effective at employing lean, it's at the floor level and it's reinforcing the behaviors that optimize how you run your operation. And there's technology that will now automatically pull even the most inexperienced person into doing things that way. And so if you don't know about these technologies, go read my articles because there's a bunch of them out there, but go do your homework. I always couple it with this notion of people don't know how to employ AI. You don't have to know, because there's already so many people out there who are wrapping it into tools like this, who all you do is bring them on to help you solve your problems, and you're already using AI. You don't have to be an expert yourself. Go hire the experts.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because I've had enough time in career at this point to see trends rise and fall, where a couple of years ago, it would have been something like automation and robots and cobots are going to take over worker positions, or there was a stretch even where blockchain was a talking point about what does it do to displace workers, which I thought was crazy at the time and even crazier now. And now it's AI. So you always see these trends pop up. And I think that they complement the American worker versus replace or take away some type of manufacturing labor, because it's a critical component to producing anything. You don't replace it. You just make sure that it's skilled to the right level and can work with those tools that empower them. I think one of the biggest questions, or tying your consulting role and your consulting practice to what you've seen on the floor, the storytelling, all of those things, If you had 5 minutes with a mid-sized manufacturer's leadership team, and you've probably iterated on a few of these points already, but what is the one thing you would tell them to focus on today to be successful?
I would couple what we just talked about, those opportunities for bringing in technology fixes, technology help with the various problems, to getting out on the floor for yourself. I see this trend through my career where it's like the people who have risen to the higher levels of leadership in manufacturing see that as their golden ticket to never have to worry about the floor again. And if you're in manufacturing and you're not on the floor, to me, you're not doing your job. Toyota gets all the press, and yet people miss the highest levels of executives in Toyota are routinely on their auto assembly floors, working with the workers, not just out there doing the standard executive tour where the plant's been all cleaned up and they don't see any of the problems. No, they're out there in the real world, working with the people on the front line to understand, okay, what are the problems today and how do we fix them? So I don't care what level you're at in manufacturing, you need to be engaged in that work. And what you then bring is you should have also the time to study what those potential solutions are out in the technology world, like Variable, like these other companies I referred to, and be able to couple those up to truly solve the problems that your frontline workers are facing day to day.
Absolutely. We see it all the time on the shop floor where there might be that disconnect, and it could be a disconnect over a technology. And in the worst case, it's a disconnect from what you're actually building on a daily basis, where people get so far separated from that, or a management class that steps away from the actual work. And at a time like this, it's not great to be close or not close to your workers, because there should be spikes in orders. There will be down cycle issues with different sourcing strategies. It's an important time for manufacturers. Also wanted to get a chance to talk about some of the work that you have coming up and where our listeners can follow along. I'd mentioned Substack, and you had mentioned your book. Where can our audience find out more about you and your work and your web show?
The web show's on YouTube, Rumble, and the various podcast outlets. It's both video and audio format. Manufacturing Talks, you can go to manufacturingtalks.com and see it there. Forbes, just search for my name on the Forbes site. You'll find my author page and all my articles listed there. And then the Substack is also Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinoski. So just search by that name or my name, and those will pop up. My company is called Cosgrove Content and Consulting, and you can find that both through my LinkedIn site and my own webpage of that name. I've made it public now. My goal is to be the micro of manufacturing. Not that I want to be famous. I have no desire to follow that direction, but to truly be making that kind of difference he's making with skilled trades in the manufacturing world. To me, the two march in lockstep somewhat, because the skilled trades gap is certainly hitting manufacturing, but it's beyond that. It's just also manufacturing work as a whole, and people who for several generations now have been steered away from that quite wrongheadedly, and obviously my biased view. It really is going to take a wholesale effort on the part of people like us in manufacturing to help now change that perception. We're older, the jobs are the sweatshop stuff, the dark, dirty, dangerous stuff we talked about. And we need to show them that it's completely different than that, and it's high tech, and it's exciting and rewarding.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. And it's something that we see all the time, where the access to the manufacturing world and understanding what's truly going on. It needs a champion. You're a great one. We appreciate you coming on and really enjoyed this. This was packed with insight, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matt. It was good to chat with you.
Be sure to check out Jim's show, where he mentioned on his links on YouTube and Rumble. If you can, feel free to follow along with us or subscribe on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. And to stay ahead of the curve and to help plan your strategy, please check out our website at variableops.com and under the resources section titled Trump 2.0, where you can see the framework around upcoming policies and how it will impact you. Also, if you're on socials, give us a follow on LinkedIn, X, or Instagram. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to follow the show wherever you listen. And also leave us a rating, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you again for joining us and learning more about how you can make your way.